we are trying to make the human the basic reference of value. If you're going to make the human the basic reference of value and make everything else subordinate to the human. Now what we did, how did it happen? It happened this way. That after we were here and we got our independence from England, we wrote a constitution. And a person could say that the American Constitution is the perfect prescription for destroying the continent and even the planet. The American Constitution is the most devastating document ever invented. Now, why would I say that? It's because the Constitution itself, it's not exactly the Constitution, but the 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. The Constitution could not be accepted except the Bill of Rights. It took 2 years, I believe, for the 10 amendments to be passed to constitute what we call the Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights gave humans, it kind of crowned Western civilization. I even say this. I even say that the American Constitution is the consummation and the termination of Western civilization. Because Western civilization is tied into an exaltation of the human, particularly since Christian spirituality combined with Greek humanism to constitute an anthropocentrism has dominated our Western world. Now, this is more than simple patriarchy, a person might say. It's a focus on the human as the normal value. Now, and it even goes back to the question of the religious question of the human. Now, even the biblical world is it's not been fully appreciated, the extent to which it establishes the universe as the sacred community. In other words, in earlier theological context, the story of Genesis that has after each day, God says it's good. After 6 days, that's the last day, he says it's very good. Now that sense that what the Creator was looking for, wasn't creating this for this and that, he was creating a whole thing, and it's described as creating part by part. But obviously it's like an artist with a painting. You paint this and paint that, but you're after a completed, integral reality. The creation story of Genesis is the creation of an integral community of existence. And that is the sacred community. It's not it's not simply the human and everything else is done around the human. The human is a component in the whole. And that's why in the great work of Thomas Aquinas in his great synthesis of Christian thought goes back to something of that Plato was speaking of, that because the divine, divine goodness seeks to diffuse. Why is there a creation in the first place? Because goodness seeks to diffuse itself, to give itself. So, if the divine is all good, infinitely good, it needs to give itself, but it has to give itself in a creation, to bring things into being, to give existence to something that the divine and the creation could interact with. But but the divine could not create another deity, so it created a great diversity of things. Thomas always insists diversity is the perfection of the universe. Now, it creates a great diversity so that the perfection of one, the limitations of one, would be supplied by the others. And the whole universe together will participate in and manifest the divine more than any single being whatsoever. Now you have, even in St. John's, in the epistles of St. John, when he said, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. The word for that is cosmos. It's not the human world, it's the universe. Cosmos. God so loved, the Greek term is cosmos, which is the universe. And God so loved the universe that he gave his own Son, that the universe might be redeemed through him. It was a universe process. It was not a redemption of the human in some way out of. Now, our modern religious thinking is derived, it seems to me, largely from the plague, the experience of the plague in 1347, when a third of the people died. And that's when religiously, this was a shock in every way. Religiously, it was a terrible shock. But it was a shock socially. It was a shock in the aesthetics. The paintings changed. That's when you began to get paintings of the Last Judgment, of Christ, arm raised, threat of driving the wicked into hell, and so forth. This sense of dealing with the planet, with the universe, by being redeemed out of it. We get the alienation from the cosmological order. We get a spirituality of the 15th century, and then we get the Puritanism of the 16th century, where there's a kind of a disdain for any kind of brilliance in worship, or any kind of brilliance of life. The idea was to that the world, that the more Christian you were, the more you had to be alienated from life. Religious orders arose too, and a little later that were in the Catholic world in the 17th century. The Catholic phrase of Puritanism was Jansenism. There was somebody called Jansenius that evolved a really tense spirituality. But already back when the plague came into existence and a third of Europe died, in Florence, the population diminished from 90,000 to 45,000 in 6 months. In Siena, from 40,000 to 15,000 in 6 months. It was an awesome tragedy. We still have not recovered from it. In the Catholic world, the faithful stopped receiving communion at Mass because they felt that they were not worthy, that it was too holy a thing, that humans, you had to undergo a period of penance. You had to be forgiven your sins in a very special way and undergo this rigorous discipline in order to receive communion, and do that 2 or 3 times a year, maybe at Christmas or at Easter or something like that. But the idea that whenever you celebrated the Eucharist, that you received communion, that would have been felt a kind of a violation of the sacred dimension of the Eucharist, because we were not that much purified from our contact with the world. So but anyway, coming back, I want to come back to the Constitution. But this gave way to, once the religious people abandoned the natural world, the entrepreneurial commercial people took over. And we began this secular religious division, that the state becomes very secular and religion becomes religion, and both are very happy because religious people don't have to take care. They can leave the natural world up to the secular world and leave the religious world up to the religious people. But but going back to the Constitution. The Constitution gives of the fullness of human rights, such as existed nowhere else in the world. And it gave humans particularly the rights of property, and to use property as they wish without interference. And to this day, now that's why now in the, but going back to the Constitution, but it gave no rights and no protections to anything not human. There were no limitations. We could do anything we want with the non-human world. And so that and that left the non-human world vulnerable, totally vulnerable. We can do anything we want to. It's not, in other words, but this did not make so much difference until the end of the last century. At the end of the last century, we got the power to do things that we never previously had the power to do, because it wasn't until our scientific technologies came in, particularly the chemical and the electronic technologies and the engineering, the electrical engineering and the chemical engineering come into being, that we can do with the natural world what we've been doing in the 20th century. But it all happened, the climax came in the 1880s, when all the big corporations were formed. It's surprising. And I have the list in the book I did called The Great Work, where in the chapter, The Extractive Economy, I list the Westinghouse, the four big oil companies, petroleum companies, Westinghouse, U.S. Steel, the GE, General Electric, AT&T, the Johnson & Johnson, the pharmaceuticals. It's just, I'm still amazed at what happened in the 1880s. Now, just before that, Edison set up the first research laboratory to discovery of inventions of humans in their intrusion into the natural world. I saw somewhere that Edison made something like 1,000 patents. He invented the electric light. He invented the movies, the motion picture. He invented just an enormous number of things. But because he came to understand the electronics, he also understood chemistry. Now, and then the automobile came in, then Ford set up business in 1903, General Motors in 1908. And then the roads began to be built. I was born in 1914, and they were just beginning to pave roads in this area. And there were only 15,000 people in Greensboro. But in this whole process, the assault began on this continent, and we have gotten this situation where it's not only this continent that's imperiled, but it's spread all over the planet. We have taken over the governments, but what is most significant it has to do with the jurisprudence. I have set up recently an international organization for a new jurisprudence that would remedy particularly the absence of rights for the non-human world. We had our first meeting outside of Washington in April. I had people from South Africa, London, Malaysia, from the Inuit people of Canada, from the Amazon, and it was a very interesting group of people that formed this international group for a new jurisprudence that would provide a more valid jurisprudence based on the fact that every being has rights. But going back, the rights come with existence, that the universe is, in the phenomenal world, is self-referent. Everything else is self-referent in its being and self-normative in its actions. In the phenomenal world, there's a person can argue there's transphenomenal, the divine world, but the divine world creates the world through a self-organizing universe. But but we have to recognize that that rights come with existence. The universe is self-referent and self-normative in its activity. Everything else comes from that. But every being has three rights: the right to be, the right to habitat, and the right to fulfill its role in the great community of existence. And then there's then the next step is to say that rights are species-specific and limited. That birds have bird rights, rivers have river rights, trees have tree rights, fish have fish, humans have human rights. But everything, the rights of a bee would be no good for a tree, and the rights of one species no good for another species. So the rights, the diversity of rights has to be recognized, but the rights of everything to the expression of itself needs to come into existence. Otherwise, we're never going to know. What's important about America, though, and I don't, do we still have time? I'd better stop. Well, let me finish this, and then I'll stop. But
what is important about America?
Well, there's just one thing I want to say about the disaster of this particular country in its difficulty, because this is a real difficulty. But it has to do with the uh, with how this government functions. There are, as everybody knows, three branches of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Now, in the early 19th century, the judiciary took control of the situation. In a sense, it's not in the Constitution, but Supreme Court Justice Marshall assumed the right to declare acts of the administration and acts of Congress non-constitutional. So the ultimate ruling power is the court. Now, this, what is happening is what has happened. If you would read the writings of Martin Horowitz, who is the historian of law at Harvard, who has written this, he did it some 12 or 15 years ago, The Transformation of American Law. In the early days of the 19th century, immediately after the Constitution went into effect, the legal judiciary bonded with the commercial entrepreneurial people against the people, the worker, and the farmer. Or, in other words, what was good for the entrepreneurial commercial people was supposed to be good for everybody. So from there on, the commercial entrepreneurial people became the power back of the power that that declared what was valid and not valid in American life. Now, at the present time, what is important about this, I think, is that recently, in fact, just in the last 2 weeks, the NCDR, what is it, the National Defenses Research, the NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, put out a 36-page document called Hostile Environment, which, and what it means is that the court system is hostile to the environmental issue. And this, and the subtitle is How the Federal Courts Are Giving Us, or defending polluted air and water and so forth. How the courts, in other words, how they are crippling the ecology issue, and that we cannot expect the environmental issue to improve under our present court mode of action. So that, well, it's, we have some experience of it here and some of the things, but that is one of the things that I wanted to present.
I have a need. What is our hope?
What is the hope? The people. Well, there's 4 possibilities, but the hope is in the fact that there's a revulsion taking place against this situation throughout the country. It's minuscule, like in this area. The environmental movement, Greensboro is run by business people, for business people, and the Chamber of Commerce and the citizenry. They can act together. The citizenry can't, and the citizenry is dependent upon them for jobs. We don't, and the newspaper. doesn't dare really oppose what's happening because we all depend on it. So the challenge, though, is that I sometimes say there are difficult issues are only taken care of by two things: terror, or what happens if you don't do it, and the attraction of what will happen if you do something. Now, what has happened is, to me, terrifying. And the future for the children is going to be increasingly difficult. When I was born, there were less than 2 billion people on the planet. They are coming into being where there are already over 6 billion, and over 9 billion are projected after 2050.
She's not comforted.
Pardon?
She's not comforted by that.
Yeah.
Four hopes. What are your four?
Pardon?
What are your four hopes?
Oh, the four groups. Oh,
Hopes.
they are the economic group, the universities. So you have the corporations, the universities, the churches, and the government, the legal government, the legal, political, the economic, the educational, and the religious. Now, all four are failing. They're all four across the board are failing. The universities are training people for the corporations. I would talk to, years ago, I was talking to a group of scientists at State University about the training of the scientists, and particularly the engineering people, and that they were giving them the means to destroy everything because they knew the chemistry of things. They knew how to do the distortions that are coming into the functioning of the planet. And but they needed to train their science people in the power that they had and the discipline of its use. And they agreed, but they said, we can't do anything about it because the corporations fund all our research projects.
So where is my hope?
I read something this afternoon
Pardon?
about universities, Thomas, that
Pardon?
give me some hope. I said, I read something this afternoon about a new center that's forming at Hampshire College in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
It's being formed by, I guess, UMass and Amherst in Hampshire and Smith and Mount Holyoke. It's a center for contemplative practice within the university. It's the first real point of entry for contemplative practice to be recognized within the university in our time. That gave me an enormous amount of hope.
But what can
Because
I
going
do?
back to where we started with the Tao,
Well,
it seems to me that the hope comes from spiritualizing the intellect in our time, even more than in changing the Bill of Rights. It
Yeah.
seems to me the hope.
well, this is happening all over. Where's the hope? Here, where we are right now. This is the hope for the children that are coming here and they're learning something. No, there are thousands, many thousands of projects taking place now. And you see, in the history of this, if you look up on the website something on conservation of the conservation movement, you can get a whole list of the conservation movement that goes back as far as the 1840s, and it give you all the naturalists, and we give you all the founding of the Interior Department of Government, and the founding of the wilderness areas, the parkland, and so forth, but all the movements that have taken place. But the I could draw up a list of thousands of projects. I just came back from Vermont, where it's just one thing that's happening, but where in the Catholic world, it's the sisters' religious orders that are beginning to deal with this. And there's a young nun that has just founded the Green Mountain Monastery in Vermont on the basis, with the objective of setting a new pattern of relationship of humans with the land. And it will be in the tradition of Saint Benedict, but it will, and it's being joined by a nun who's a physician and also a nun that's an artist. And there are a number of other people. There were 25 people from different religious groups of women that met, and they are the council of this group. And they are themselves beginning to function. In fact, right after Thanksgiving, I'm going to Philadelphia to meet with a religious order that has inherited some time ago from the Drexel family 2.5 miles of land along the James River. And they're putting that into a conservation project. And, I should have mitigated this presentation by giving more of these Miriam Trees McGillis at Genesis Farm with our community-supported agriculture, her Earth Literacy program, which has already had people from all over the world come to study our relationship with the earth. And then there's Wes Jackson with the Land Institute in Kansas, or Fred Kirschenmann in the Plains, establishing the Organic Agricultural Project. There's Amory Lovins, they did this book with, who's Hawkins? Yeah, Paul Hawkins on natural capitalism to diminish. I don't think he has the answer, but because it's still dealing with the land as natural resource. I have to make another detour to
Tell her to run over near the light.
Yeah.